Welcome, class, to uh, the beginning of our unit on post-structuralism and this lecture on Derrida. Let me say before I start that if you haven't done the reading, if you haven't struggled through that excerpt called Differance, please do that before you listen to this YouTube lecture. It will contain some spoilers. And if you're not from my Anglo-American University class, welcome. You don't have to do the reading. So, what is deconstruction? Oh, and the other important thing for you guys is to write down questions as they occur to you. Like YouTube has a pause button and you can write down stuff. Bring it to class so that this isn't just you absorbing information and not having a chance to talk back and stuff, because that's an important part of this whole process. So what is deconstruction? Deconstruction, most simply put, is simply acknowledging that whenever you say something about something, you can't say everything about something. Whatever you're going to say, whatever you say is going to leave some things out, some things unsaid. Language, that is to say, contains a supplement, as Derrida calls it. It always wants to say more than it actually does say. Therefore, according to Derrida, you can never arrive at a final meaning of any text, because whatever text you are working with, something will remain hidden, left over, unwritten. And for Derrida, that unwritten, or what he called the other of the text, sometimes with a capital O, other, that is what he was most interested in. Because this silent other, this present absence, this thing that's there but not really there, if that makes sense, that other has the potential to destabilize the text and the meaning, and to cause it to release other meanings. He wanted to destabilize the central meaning of the text, that is, its authoritative central meaning, to bring in marginalized meanings, meanings that have been silenced and are at the margins of the text. And the reason we don't see that, according to Derrida, is because our philosophical traditions, the ways we have learned to think, have always privileged what Derrida calls presence over absence. What is presence? Presence differs according to the philosophical system, but it can be being or truth or God or nature or whatever. Derrida called this bias that favors presence and truth and meaning and God and whatever over absence. He called that logocentrism. Logos from the Greek meaning word or reason plus centrism, putting it at the center. And logocentrism effectively silences the other meanings of the text so that we can force a unified meaning onto the text. So this quote, all metaphysicians, that is, all people who have theorized about ultimate reality, from Plato to Rousseau, Descartes to Husserl, have proceeded in this way, conceiving the good to be before evil, the positive before the negative, the pure before the impure, the simple before the complex, the essential before the accidental, the imitated before the imitation. That's presence over absence. So how does deconstruction work? How does Derrida feel he can attack presence or logocentrism and release those other meanings? He does it by radicalizing Saussure's structuralism, pushing it past where Saussure saw it, pushing it to its logical limits. And for those of you who don't know, this is a still from the movie Whiplash, and I've posted a link in the description to this scene that the still is taken from. But as you can see, I have cleverly substituted the Neiman's head for Derrida's head for Neumann's head, and Saussure's head for the protagonist. I can't remember his name. Okay, so he pushes poor Saussure past his limits. And how does he do that? Well, for Derrida, meaning is différance. And he makes up this word. He uses, which plays upon the French verb différer, and kind of puts it in a gerund form by adding that A. He means it both to differ and to defer. So, according to him, meaning is, along with Saussure, the product of difference between signs, right? Cat has no meaning without everything that is non-cat. This is just straight up Saussure. There is no positive original meaning of either the signifier dog here. It only is what it is because it is differing from log, cog, jog, dig, bog, dot, or whatever. And the signified, the concept that goes along with the acoustical image of the signifier, the signified only has a meaning as a position within the sign system, within the signified system. So dog is not fire hydrant, not bird, not tree, not mouse, not cat, not man, and so forth. In other words, as we said before, for any given sign, it is what it is because it's not what it's not. For any signifier or signified, it is what it is because it's not what it's not. It only is what it is because it's not what it's not. There is no positive meaning of dog or cat or whatever. That is, language means not by connecting us directly with something in the world, like a real dog, but rather by a system of differences between signs, between signifiers and signifieds and signs. That is to say, language means not referentially by referring, but differentially by differing. All right, so that's just Saussure. But then the implication of that is that meaning is always deferred. And this is the other meaning of both the Latin and the French word différer. The signifier always carries other meanings, according to Derrida, to which it silently refers. It refers to other, the signifier always refers to other signifiers. It always means, like, take cat, for example. The sign cat means more than just the animal that meows and drinks milk. It can mean a jazz musician. It can mean a spiteful woman being catty. It can mean a type of boat, a catamaran. It can mean a type of fish, catfish. So once we look up any of those words in the dictionary, we'd find references to even more meanings. The signifier cat does not come to rest in a solid, unified, signified, and just come to rest. It only leads to more signifiers. But once we have a context for our word, we can be pretty sure of what we mean, right? Right? Like when I say, that sax player is one cool cat, the context tells me I'm talking about a man who plays jazz, not an animal who meows and drinks milk. But Derrida says even the context cannot finally control the meaning. Every sign carries what he calls traces of other absent meanings. They are, quote unquote, in the text, even when the text doesn't draw attention to them by making them the central meaning. And this deferring of meanings isn't true just of signs, but also of whole texts. Each text carries traces of other texts to which it silently refers. Derrida calls this condition intertextuality. Every text, he said, is like a tapestry made up of many threads or traces, some of which lead to other texts. In other words, texts are haunted by the traces of the other to which, or others to which it silently refers. And Derrida uses those traces, those threads to other texts, to destabilize and deconstruct textual meaning in the text that he's analyzing. So now you may be wondering, and you probably should, why? Why is he doing this? Why is he so keen on destabilizing texts? Because he said this is simply the nature or unnature of language as writing. Derrida, in an article called Linguistics and Grammatology, critiqued Saussure, even as he employs Saussure's insights about language being a system of differences and oppositions. In particular, he critiqued what he called Derrida's phonocentrism, that is, how Saussure privileges speaking over writing. Derrida sees in Saussure a systematic bias against writing compared to speaking. Even as Saussure privileges la langue over la parole, the language system over the actual utterances, Saussure also sees writing as a derivative, defective reflection of a more original speaking. Even given that, which of course, if you're thinking, would be logocentric, right? Speaking over writing means meaning has a central stabilizing presence. Even given that language is ultimately a system of differences, it is what it is only because it's not what it's not. It always, for Saussure, comes to rest in a speaking person, in la parole, in the actual utterances of a person. Okay, so you're saying, so what? What's the problem? For Derrida, that hierarchy of speaking over writing needs to be resisted and destabilized itself, because making the voice a central and ruling influence over language infers what he calls a metaphysics of presence. In other words, it infers an ultimate belief that meaning is transparently, immediately, intuitively available because of the presence of a speaker, a self-presence of a speaker. We can always say, no. If somebody misunderstands us and we're right there, we're present, we can say, no. What I meant was this, not that. What I meant was X, not Y. A speaking presence guarantees that we'll get the right meaning eventually, right? It'll come to rest and we'll all know and understand what this guy meant. Writing, on the other hand, introduces an element of distance, of delay, of detour, of obscurity, simply because the speaker is not present to correct us. If the speaker isn't present, then different meanings can be disseminated from the text without a controlling authorial presence limiting those meanings, saying, no, this is the real meaning, not that. Speaking, therefore, clarifies meaning. Writing problematizes and destabilizes it. And Derrida says something that's really counterintuitive. He says that writing is necessary for speech rather than the other way around. But he uses writing in an expanded metaphorical sense, what he called in your essay proto-writing or arche writing. What he means is that the nature of language is fundamentally like a written text. The language system is governed by a root undecidability of meaning, what he calls play, because it is a system of differences, of oppositions, rather than being a speaking with clear meanings because of a governing voice, because of the presence of the speaker. Because language is, finally, it is what it is only because it's not what it's not, then there's this undecidable nature to it that is more like a written text without somebody there to correct us than it is like a speaker who can correct us and get us to the right meaning. And because language is of the nature of a text, it always defers meaning, puts it off by showing that at each level, an assumed presence is simply a structure composed of differences. Deconstruction is just showing how a linguistic unit is a construction. It's not solid, it's not stable, it's not present. Like a Matryoshka doll, right? These Russian dolls, and you open one up and there's another one and you're like, oh, okay. And then you keep opening them up and you say, surely this one is the solid one. This one is the beginning of all the other dolls that can come apart. But no, it's just constructions all the way down forever and ever. Amen and amen. Or like Chinese boxes, you keep opening another one and there's another one there. At each moment, all of these show that they're made up, composed of, constructed of different parts, oppositional parts, differential parts that can be further deconstructed, and on and on and on and on. In other words, if we replace speech with proto-writing, that is, if we displace the self-assured presence of speaking with the undecidability, the root undecidability of textuality, the whole operation of language is destabilized, and you allow for what Derrida called a free play of signifiers without closure. And that is seen by deconstructionists as a metaphor for freedom, for liberation, releasing the text from its prison of a unitary authoritative meaning and allowing it to mean other things. And somebody put together this adorable little meme of the free-range sign farm, far away from any centralized reference, where your signs can escape logocentrism's rigid metaphysics of presence and engage in free play and the endless motion of pure difference. Or, I'm sorry, différance. Derrida loved zombies for this exact reason. Undecidability. Zombies have an undecided status. They are undead. They're both kind of alive and dead. At the same time, you can't really decide which. They're sexless. They're neither male nor female. They have an indeterminate morality. They're neither good nor evil. Or maybe they're both. Deconstruction says because language is proto-writing, arche writing, it zombifies everything. Language is an artifact of zombification, if you want to put it that way. And it's just undecidable play all the way down. And this lack of closure in deconstructed language means that language cannot be used to oppress people, especially marginalized people, whether racial minorities or ethnic minorities or sexual minorities or gender minorities or whatever. Language can't be used against them. These are society's silent others. You can't oppress them by imposing on them a single order, a single meaning. Oppressive societies may continue to do that, but they do it without justification because their own language undermines them, at least according to deconstructionists. Of course, the same can be said about meaning when it's used to speak out against oppression. There's no unitary meaning, so maybe oppressive meanings are released or whatever, but that is usually ignored by deconstructionists. Therefore, when you're doing deconstruction, when you come across the cultural or linguistic structures upon which we depend for meaning, and they are often binary oppositions, differences that house a hierarchy in which one is superior and the other is inferior, you have to remember that these hierarchies are not natural oppositions. Remember Barth, there is no nature with a capital N. These are simply and only cultural conventions. They are these binary oppositions where one is superior and one is inferior. These are arbitrary cultural conventions, and they are held in place by oppressive and arbitrary cultural beliefs and practices which privilege one over the other, good over evil, just over unjust, masculine over feminine, rational over irrational, nature over culture. All these are defined by cultural practices that give one group a favored position to make one seem superior and another inferior. But in reality, whatever that means, these are just so many texts that make one meaning central while marginalizing other meanings. In fact, Derrida says everything has this textual nature. And this is I cannot believe, but yes, I can believe that Derrida appears as well, I don't know the comic this is taken from, so I can't tell if he's a hero or a villain, but he's somebody determined saying there is nothing outside a text. The actual French there is il n'y a pas hors texte. There is no outside text, literally. That is, everything everything that we encounter must be interpreted through linguistic categories. Everything has this textual nature that favors certain meanings as central and other meanings as marginal. Everything meaningful can be interpreted and broken down in this way. Everything can be deconstructed. How? Well, the deconstructionist, the one doing deconstruction, needs to show how the language of the text, the oppositions upon which it depends, actually undermine the supposed meaning of the text, undermine presence in the text. And sometimes it does this by showing that the privileged part of the binary opposite can't even exist without the inferior partner. It cannot exist without its other. There is no right without a wrong. There is no rationality without madness. That is, rationality is madness differed. It's the other, the silent other of rationality. Our ideas of masculinity or femininity differed. And it is this negation of otherness that that is an assertion of masculinity is sort of a negation of what it means to be a woman. It's a negation of that otherness, but it contains traces of that silent otherness as well. Heterosexuality depends on homosexuality, and so forth. You show how a seemingly natural opposition breaks down, how each term has the seeds of the other within it, traces of the other within it. In America, what it means to be white is blackness differed. Or for Czechs, what it means to be Czech depends on is gypsiness differed. You have to show how these oppositions depend upon prejudices that need to be revealed, examined, and reversed. There is no essence. There is no natural essence of Americanness or Czechness or Frenchness that is not derived from and dependent upon that which it stands in opposition to. They're silent others. They are all derivative signifiers dependent upon difference, dependent upon playing off of other signifiers which it negates, but which it also contains. Right? Try to wrap your head around that. But that's what deconstruction is about. That is what is meant by deconstructing those oppositions, showing them to be mere cultural linguistic constructions which actually contain that which they negate. The absence implies the presence. Sometimes deconstruction happens through getting at the history of meanings contained in a word, what we call etymology, and this I can't remember the name of the comic, but it's a famous internet comic artist where he mistakenly mistook etymology for entomology and goes to an etymologist to try to fight a giant praying mantis, I guess. And that's instructive too, because sometimes getting into the history of the word releases new deconstructive meanings that destabilize the text. Sometimes even a pun, even sounding alike, is, for Derrida, enough to release new meanings. You know, he's written some famous analyses in which a pun is the thing that destabilizes the text. The key idea for Derrida and for deconstruction is that there is no area of pure presence which gives meaning to language that cannot itself be deconstructed, except, I would say, of course, the opposition between oppressor and oppressed. That remains, I would argue, an unspoken locus of pure presence for Derrida and deconstructionists. But we'll get to that later when I critique Derrida. So, but back to deconstruction. Why is there no pure presence? Why no innocent center of language? Because meaning arises from the play of language, language as arche writing, the structural instability built into language. By exploiting and uncovering play, the analyst can find traces of alien meanings in the text itself, thus destroying the supposed unity of the text. One can bring these marginalized meanings, the silent others, to the center of the text and give the text an undecidability. One has no ultimate reference point for choosing one reading over another, and that gives way to a pure play of signifiers, or what I called earlier, zombification. All right, that is the Derrida and Deconstruction lecture. And if you were listening, I am sure you had questions. So bring them to class, and we'll go through some examples of that. And I'll send you guys an email. There's one writing that I want you guys to read for class, but I'll send you a Neo message about that. All right, that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you guys in class.